This one that I'm bringing is actually for a children's book, and it's the chapter 3 of the children's book. So I'll just tell you very briefly what's happening. There's a dragon in a school, and he's become aware that the nativity play is taking place and that everybody in the school is involved in it except him, and he wants to be part of the nativity. He sees the headmaster, who's Mr. Mealing, and Mr. Mealing was not quite sure what to say about it, and he says not all the children are in the play, some are in the choir. So the dragon decides, I'll go and speak to the teacher who looks after the choir, and I'm going to join the choir because I want to be part of the nativity. Right. So this is for children, but I think some of the things, I'll just read him. The dragon did not know where a choir was, but a little thing like that wasn't going to stop him joining one. He went back to his den to think about his next move. Mrs. Hurst was the music teacher, and she came to school once a week. He looked at the calendar on his wall. Jay had made it for him so he would know the important parts of the school timetable. As the dragon was still not good at reading, he'd only been learning for 6 months, Jay had put in pictures for different lessons. Monday afternoon had a picture of musical instruments, so that was the day Mrs. Hurst came to the school. And today was Monday, because it was the first day that the children were back. He thought about Mrs. Hurst. She wasn't like the other teachers. In fact, she was a bit weird. She wore long skirts and floaty scarves and called everyone, except Mr. Mealing, dear or petal. At the end of the day, when she had finished teaching, he would often amble into the hall to talk to her. She would play the piano for him and sing songs, Danny Boy, the Bog Song and the Quartermaster's Store. Sometimes he would keep the beat with his tail, smashing on the floor, while Mrs. Hurst pounded on the piano keys. It was good fun until Mr. Mealing or Mr. Ford, the caretaker, told them to stop as they were making too much noise. I'll take her a present, thought the dragon, like the wise men took that baby. Then she'll let me go in the choir. He looked around his den. Quite recently he'd had the urge to collect things, especially shiny things. He looked at his hoard. There was a little dog made out of wire threaded with white and red beads. Naomi had made it for him in the after-school craft club. There was a rock he had found in the field. It was grey, but when he held it up to the light, little hard things in it sparkled. He decided to keep that. There was a piece of green glass, some crinkly blue paper, and a conker that was still in its prickly shell. He'd give her the paper. Perhaps she'd give it back to him. He waited until all the children had gone home, and then he went into the hall where Mrs. Hurst was putting away the musical instruments. Hello, he said. I brought you a present. Oh, how lovely of you. Just what I wanted. I can use it to line my drawer. Thank you so much. And she folded up the paper and put it in her handbag. The dragon was a bit upset to see it disappear so quickly, but at least she liked it. He smiled. Mrs. Hurst, I've been talking to Mr. Mealing about the nativity play, and he says that I can join the choir, if it's all right with you. Mrs. Hurst's mouth opened and her bottom jaw fell slightly to one side. The dragon stared at her. She closed her mouth and gave a hesitant smile. The dragon stared at her. Well, if Mr. Mealing says so. I didn't know that you could sing. Do you want to join the infant choir or the junior? Both, said the dragon. So you have to sing if you're in a choir? Yes, dear, but you have to sing the same notes as the other people at the same time and use the same words. Notes? Is that writing? I'm not very good at writing. No, Petal, it's musical notes. Mrs. Hurst put her finger on the keyboard of the piano and pressed one of the white blocks. It made a sound and she sang la in the same tone. I can't sing. The dragon was impressed. Let's see if you can do it. Move back a bit further. I need to hear if your voice will carry. Now open your mouth, take a deep breath and sing the note that I play. The dragon moved to the middle of the hall, stood up straight and looked at Mrs. Hurst. She smiled encouragingly at him and sat at the piano, finger poised. The dragon nodded to her and she pressed the keyboard with her finger. He opened his mouth, took a deep breath and sang. Fire came out of his mouth like a blowtorch. Sparks flew in the air and some landed on the cover at the back of the piano. Mrs. Hurst screeched, dashed forward and threw the cover to the floor. Then she did a wild dance, stamping on her boots on the flame, until only smoke was left wisping up towards the ceiling. The singeing smell filled the hall. Mrs. Hurst turned to look at the dragon, who was still standing with his mouth wide open. "Close your mouth, dear," she said. "I think it's done enough damage for one day." The dragon closed his mouth with a snap and then immediately opened it again. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Perhaps if I took a smaller breath next time." "I'm not sure that's wise." "Oh, please, Mrs. Hurst, it won't happen again, I promise. I just got my breathing wrong. Please, please let me try again." Mrs. Hurst looked into the dragon's pleading eyes and relented. "All right, one more try, but move to the back of the hall." "Why?" "Because I don't want to be fried, dear," retorted Mrs. Hurst. The dragon could see the sense in that, so he moved to the back of the hall and turned to face Mrs. Hurst. "Now, gently this time, Petal. I will play one note and you relax and sing." The dragon nodded and started breathing in gently through his nostrils and out through the little O in his mouth. Mrs. Hurst played a note and the dragon echoed it. It was perfect, but a little quiet. She played a higher note and again the dragon copied it. "Brilliant," enthused Mrs. Hurst. "You're a natural. Now try this." She played a chord of rising notes. Flushed with his success, the dragon took a deeper breath and once again fire came shooting out of his mouth. "Mind the curtains," screeched Mrs. Hurst, but it was too late. The curtains over the window, separating the infant classroom from the hall, caught fire, and soon flames were roaring up to the ceiling. The fire alarm started clanging, drowning out the whoosh of the flames. Mr. Ford rushed in, holding the fire extinguisher, closely followed by Mr. Mealing. There was a flurry of activity, ending with the curtains and floor being covered with white foam. Smoke wafted around the hall. Everyone looked at the dragon, who looked horrified back at them. Mr. Mealing broke the silence. "What is going on?" he demanded. "I was only trying to sing," answered the dragon. "It was an accident." Mr. Mealing turned and looked inquiringly at Mrs. Hurst. "It's true," she confirmed. "The trouble is that when he sings, flames come out of his mouth. I don't think he can help it." "I don't mind trying again. If I practice enough, I'm sure to get it right." "No," shouted Mr. Mealing, Mrs. Hurst and Mr. Ford at the same time. "But if I don't practice, how can I be in the choir?" asked the dragon. "Listen carefully, dragon," said Mr. Mealing. "You are not going to be in the choir, ever." The dragon looked at Mrs. Hurst. She shook her head. "I'm sorry, dragon. You obviously have a voice, but we can't risk you breathing fire over the children. Health and safety wouldn't allow it, and I must admit that I would be a bit worried as well. Perhaps you can do something else." "But I want to be in the choir." "I am the headmaster," retorted Mr. Mealing, "and I'm telling you that you are not going to be in the choir. Would you mind leaving this hall so that Mr. Ford and I can clean it up ready for tomorrow? And no, we do not want you to help us. You've made enough mess for one day. Good night." The dragon realised Mr. Mealing was not in a good mood and wouldn't listen to any arguments. He went towards the door and turned around to politely say good night. He got as far as good and the door was shut in his face. He looked at it for a few seconds and then moved slowly towards his den in the boiler house. He needed to think about his next plan.